Marc, thank you very much for being on our channel today. We can't express how grateful we are to have you. First of all, how are you doing today? How's lockdown been a few months ago? And yeah, how are you enjoying the Formula One season so far?
Yeah, well, tough lockdown for like it was for everybody, I guess. Mostly because Formula One ground to a halt, and whilst I'm a massive fan of the sport, it also kind of provides a lot of what I do for a living. So that all stopped, which was tough. But on the flip side of that, it's nice to spend some time at home because I travel a lot. So hanging out with the family has been really cool. And since Formula One's got back going again, I mean, it's been great, isn't it? I've really enjoyed it. I thought, it's been really cool seeing some slightly different, these fast come, thick and fast races that are coming on. We're going to some new circuits, starting with Mugello, of course, this weekend. So yeah. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, it's been great. And obviously, firstly, you work with McLaren, so how have McLaren been impressing you so far? Carlos Sainz almost got the victory, but instead got his second podium of his career in Monza. I mean, of course, a thrilling race with Gasly winning, but I mean, what was it like for you watching Sainz and even Norris as well? A great, both of those being on the podium now must have been great for your former team.
It's been brilliant, yeah, because they've had such a tough time over such a long period of time now. Yeah. And actually, for half the guys, I mean, I was very lucky that I was there at McLaren during a really successful period where we were winning races and winning championships even. So it was amazing. But for a lot of those guys that are in that garage, a lot of them have never even experienced a race win. They've never had that feeling. And I can promise you there's nothing like that feeling. It's just the most amazing thing. And it, apart from the moment that you're in, it also inspires kind of, what comes after it. So once you've won once, that's why you see people winning again, because they've got that kind of winning mentality. They know how to do it. They know what not to do. And a lot of those guys just haven't had that yet. And so at the weekend, they came so close. I was kind of torn because I really wanted Carlos Sainz to do it in those last few laps. But on the other hand, I didn't want Gasly not to win because he's such a nice guy. And it was such a feel-good result, wasn't it, for Formula One? So I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it.
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, McLaren, incredible season, incredible race for them. Hopefully, they can do that in Mugello and going forward. Of course, as I say, Lando and Carlos both being on the podium this season. So, as I mentioned, McLaren and your former team. So, let's move on to that. Of course, that was the highlight. 9 years, 10 seasons you were at the team. Incredible. So, let's start at the beginning. You come into the team for the first time. It's Formula One. It's the big leagues. What are you feeling at this point? And what was your road like to get into McLaren in your first season?
Well, to just quickly touch on that point, I mean, I was terrified. First day, I was terrified because, like a lot of race fans, or if you're a football fan, you look up to those people you watch every week, which is what I was doing as a fan. And I looked up to them as absolute heroes, and then the next moment I'm inside that garage wearing the same team kit, and it was just incredible. But the road to get there was, well, for me, I came straight out of college. Or even that before that, came straight out of school already knowing that I wanted to get into Formula One. So in that sense, I guess I was quite lucky that I knew from an early age what I wanted. Yeah. And then I just set on this path where, in my mind, nothing was going to stop me getting there. So I started doing mechanical engineering. I did that at college. And then out of there, I actually started working immediately for a small race team. It was a very tiny race team that raced little Caterham 7 kit cars. But it got me to a racetrack. It kind of ignited that fire. And I sort of followed the ranks. I got into what I would call more proper racing, if you like, so Formula Ford. And then I followed the same path that a driver follows. So from Formula 4 to Formula 3, and then Formula 3000, as it used to be called, now Formula 2. And all the way through, just desperate to make that final step to Formula 1. Yeah. And I remember writing letters to every single Formula 1 team. I mean, almost on a weekly basis, and getting a reply back on a weekly basis saying thanks, but no thanks, And I've got a stack of them still upstairs. And then one day after, and then what they do is they write back to me saying, right, you haven't got enough experience here, or you haven't got enough experience in this. And so I take that, whether they just sent them out as stock letters, I've no idea, but I used to take it so literally, and I go, right, well, I'll go and get that experience in. So I'd go away and I'd look for my next opportunity to gain that experience, and then go back to them and go, right, I've got it now. Yeah. And they'd find another excuse not to give me a job. And and eventually, McLaren either caved in because I was being such a pain in the arse to them, or I did finally tick all the right boxes, and they gave me an interview, and I went and joined their test team. Was the first job that I had there, and it was genuinely a dream come true. So amazing journey to get there. And then when you do finally rock up, like I say, it's terrifying, because you're all of a sudden Yeah, like you said, it's the big leagues, you know. And for me, it really was. It was a dream that I'd had for so long, and you were terrified of making a mistake. You were terrified that you weren't good enough. Did you really justify your place in that team? And of course, eventually that all settles down. The nerves settle down, and you realise you are there for a reason. You're there because you are good enough. And quickly I settled into what was an amazing team and an amazing 10 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So obviously you mentioned there sending your letters that only made you stronger. So you mentioned that your love for Formula One was always there through school and through college, and that's what you wanted to do. So what would you say? Do you have any inspirations through drivers or teams when you were growing up? What made you pursue Formula One? What was your first kind of memory, and what made you go on the F1 path?
Well, I think the very first thing was that I actually grew up living very close to Brands Hatch over in Kent. And when I was a kid, that was where they used to hold the British Grand Prix. They used to alternate it with Silverstone. So I had Formula One coming to my village, and it was a tiny little sleepy village, but every year or every other year, you know, hundreds of thousands of people would turn up, and, you know, you can't help but have your eyes opened at that point to what on earth is going on. You could hear the cars. Back then, of course, the noise was very different. You could hear it for miles around. So that was the first thing. And then when I started watching it, as I got a little bit older, I was two fascinations. It actually wasn't the drivers, if I'm really honest. It was the cars. And I remember being fascinated by cars of the past, like the six-wheelers, the Tyrrell, the big Brabham fan car. They're all before my era, before you start questioning how old I am. But, you know, there were things that I'd seen in magazines and had posters of, and, you know, were fascinating to me because they looked nothing like any other car. And from an engineering perspective, I really found that interesting. So that was one thing. I was always really interested in the technology and the still am, and the cars. And the other thing was the pit stops. I used to see these guys kind of bursting out the garage in this anonymous gear with, you know, balaclavas and the whole lot, changing the wheels and tires in these staggering speeds. And I remember thinking, there was a moment, and I forget how old I was, but probably around, I don't know, 13 or something, where I thought, I want to do that. You know, it wasn't so much for me about being a driver. I mean, I did a little bit of karting as a kid. I was always, you know, I loved going fast. I loved that side of things, but I realized, I think, that I probably didn't have the talent to get to that level. But the pit stops for me were almost as interesting. I thought they were doing something incredible, and I wanted to be part of that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, awesome. I mean, that's definitely what makes Formula One. It might be kind of a bit of a hidden gem for some people who might just see the drivers, but you're definitely in the engine and what drives the team forward. So you've come into the team of McLaren. Your first race or your first season, say, what was it like to be in that scenario? You were the main person to work with McLaren, the team that had won, you know, loads of championships in the past. You're just coming off the double world championships of Mick Hakkinen back in 98 and 99. So what was it like to work in that environment? Say, if you can remember your first race, what was it like for, say, the first time you stepped out in the McLaren overalls and serviced the McLaren cars? What was that like?
Well, it was, I mean, at first I started on the test team. So we used to have a separate test team, which still wore the same kit. We had the same cars and everything, and same trucks and the whole lot. So that was my first experience. A little bit less pressure to do that because you're not at a race. You're not got the eyes of the world on you. In that moment, you know, you're still working with Mika and David, as we were at the time. I mean, I was an absolute fanboy, and it was difficult to hold that in, you know. So that was my first thing. It was kept pinching myself, looking around the garage thinking, my God, I was watching this on telly last week. But then when I finally got, you know, I did that for, I think, a year. And then I got moved up to the race team. And that was a whole nother level, because partly because you're at a race, so it's far more exciting anyway. It's what I really wanted to do. But also when you get onto the race team, along with that comes the responsibility of being in the pit stop. And that for me was the thing that, like I said, it'd always been a dream of mine. But then it also became a reality that it's the most terrifying experience of your entire life. And that very first pit stop, I think the team manager gave me a job that he thought hardly ever happens. So he gave it to the new kid, which was putting on the spare nose cone, so the spare front wing. You only ever change that, obviously, if you have an accident. So it's very rare. And of course, in my first ever Grand Prix, it was Kimi Räikkönen at the time, knocks his nose off, and on lap one comes in for a pit stop. And it's still to this day the scariest thing I've ever had to do. I remember standing there because it was all flustered because it was the first lap. I didn't really have time to pull my balaclava on, grabbed all the gear, and I remember shaking like a leaf, visibly shaking, while the car came down the pit lane, you know. But actually, my part in that pit stop went smoothly, and you still have that fear for quite some time. But gradually you get on top of that, and then the adrenaline rush is sort of what takes over. And in the end, I loved it. And by the time I left the team after 10 years, that last pit stop I did, which was in that amazing race in Brazil, 2008, was still to me as exciting as the first one.
Yeah.
So I never lost the love for that. And it's the one bit, having left the team now, it's the one bit that I still miss, really, is the adrenaline rush of a pit stop, because you can't replace it with anything.
So you just mentioned there about Brazil 2008. One of the highlight moments for really British Formula One. You're working on Lewis's car, the man who, he had a run in 2007, great season in 2008, but it was going Massa's way. Massa crosses the line, world champion 2008, wins the Brazilian Grand Prix. So before, during and after, those 3 words that Martin Brundle says, is that Glock. Just what is your feeling for yourself and in the team, as I say, around that? Massa crosses the line, you hear Martin say that, Lewis then crosses the line and becomes 2008 world champion. What's that like for you and the team in that garage in Brazil?
I mean, unbelievable, quite hard to describe. And actually, you got to talk really about, you could talk about the whole season being up and down, because it was, but then you can talk about that race being an incredible race, because if you remember, the weather was just, like nothing you've ever seen. It was torrential rain, then it was dry, then it was wet again. And so we had all of that to contend with. And actually, all we had to do was finish in the top 5, wasn't it?
Yeah.
On a normal dry day, that was definitely easily possible. We should have easily walked away with that. But of course, the heavens open. We had all of that to contend with. But then if you fast forward to the last lap of the race, where we dropped out of the vital 5th position because it was so wet, Lewis had sort of spun off the circuit, or slid off the circuit a little bit. Yeah. And we're now in 6th, which wasn't enough. I use this term emotional roller coaster, which I think gets used so much in sport, but nothing else describes that last lap like that, because in one moment we're inside the right position, we will be world champions. Lewis then slides off the circuit. We're no longer going to be world champions, and everything you've worked for the entire year and beyond that has just disappeared, has fallen away in that second like that. And so the mood in the garage just tumbles to a deathly silence, and it feels like everything was wasted, because coming second was no good to us. We'd done that the year before. We'd missed out. So we knew how the disappointment felt. But then, you get to that point where we're clinging on. Lewis on the radio was was on the verge of giving up, but the engineers were saying, listen, don't give up. We're near, anything could happen. Just keep going. And Lewis was on the ragged edge. So we knew he was still going. But I think none of us really believed that we could do anything, because it was Vettel, I think, that we were chasing, and he was too far ahead. And then those words came from Brundle. And I think, I think everybody at home that I've spoken to since wasn't quite sure. I'm not even sure Brundle and co were sure at the time. We certainly weren't sure, and we couldn't celebrate until we were absolutely sure. And then, of course, we realised that we looked at the timing screens. We realised Glock was tumbling down the order. We were now in those positions, and nobody said anything to Lewis until he crossed the line. And then it was this reality that, as I say, when all of that work that had gone into it, and all of the years before that of not quite doing it, in that second, you've gone from picking yourselves up off the floor of a garage to being in the most crazy situation that I've ever been in, where everyone's just leaping around, screaming. People were crying. We had Nicole Scherzinger, who was Lewis's girlfriend at the time. Still, her screams pierce my ears, because it was so loud at the back of the garage, leaping around. It was just amazing. And that's the best I can describe it. But we leapt out into the pit lane. We were just hugging everybody. I do remember taking a moment actually to think about the Ferrari guys, because of course those images we all saw on the TV of the Ferrari guys suddenly realizing, after they were celebrating, suddenly realizing they were no longer world champions. I did have to feel for them, because that's got to be a heartbreaking situation to be in. But that was our moment, and we celebrated it hard, as you can imagine, all night. Had a very, very fuzzy Monday morning after that on the way home, but it was well worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds amazing. You're right. Obviously, Ferrari, Felipe Massa's dad was hugging some of the guys in the Ferrari garage. They were then told, and obviously then the guy headbutts the Scuderia Ferrari sign. Not good, but we've all seen the photos. I see Nicole going absolutely crazy. So what you made there was incredible. Lewis Hamilton, the British world champion that we hadn't had for a very long time. It was great for basically the British Formula One community. We got another one in Jensen next year, and I think that really excelled from Lewis. So your memories of Lewis Hamilton in that team, obviously, maybe when he was world champion, or maybe in that year, or maybe even his first year, as you mentioned there, you did get tantalisingly close in Brazil that previously. What was it like working with Lewis? Did you have any kind of one-to-one talks with him? Did you ever, what's your biggest memory of Lewis? Because at this point it was really just a normal kid from Stevenage driving the car, and of course now he's a six-time world champion. So what was your biggest moment or best moment working with Lewis Hamilton?
Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, I mean, my biggest moment has to be that 2008 win. I mean, that's the moment of my career. It's probably, at that moment is the moment of his career. And for so many people in our team, that would have been a highlight of their career. For a lot of racing fans, that's a highlight of their motorsport, fandom. So that's got to be up there as the best. But when I think of Lewis, and I did a video on my YouTube channel about this recently, when I first started working with Lewis, in fact, even before I started working, he was part of the Mclaren driver program, if you like. So we knew of him, we knew about him. He was always hanging around. And actually, he used to come in before he was a Formula One driver, when he was still a GP2 driver, as it was then. He'd come in and he'd quite often just come and have a chat with me around the car. And he was so inquisitive, is one of my really early memories. He wanted to know what everything did around the car, but not just, what does that box do? He wants to know the details of how it works. What's it connected to? What systems does it operate? How do those systems work? And I do remember being fascinated at the level of detail that he was interested in, because even our current race drivers never had that level of interest in what was going on inside the cockpit or around the car. So I was always really impressed by that he'd come and spend half an hour just kind of looking around, getting a full explanation. So that was really impressive. And then when he was announced as a driver, we all went away on a kind of team building week to the Finnish Olympic Institute in Western Finland it was a set of biometric tests we were doing as part of the physical preparation, but also it was a team bonding session because we had a new driver and so on. And part of that, we did a bunch of sort of mental tests as well as physical tests. And I remember seeing Lewis just stand out in a lot of these physical and mental reaction tests. So I said this in a video as well, but when we flashed up they flashed up some images of various random dots, for example, on a screen, just for a couple of seconds. And then we had to write down how many dots we thought were there. And then they'd change the number of dots, flash another one up very quickly, take it away. And again, we'd write down the numbers. And a few of us were getting it right every now and again, but Lewis was just, head and shoulders above everybody in terms of being able to get either very close or spot on with all of these huge patterns of random dots. And, at the time, I couldn't work out if it was just kind of beginner's luck or whether he had a good day. But actually, the more I think about it, it probably is part of that mental capacity that an elite sportsman has to have. And if you think about what they do inside the car, it's not just about the physicality of hustling a car around a racetrack, is it? It's about strategy. It's about, knowing when to use your ERS system, when not to use it, where to position your car, when to push, when not to, how to kind of manage tires. And all of those things take quite a lot of mental capacity, as well as the physicality of actually hanging onto a car at those speeds around a racetrack. So perhaps that was an early sign of just what, that type of sportsman has.
So you said there, obviously Lewis was mentally, strong as he was physically strong, and of course very talented in the car. And that's what's excelled him, through the years when he left McLaren going to Mercedes. And what, so the nous that he has now, would you say that was definitely there in 2008?
Yeah, I think what's changed between now and back then is obviously the experience, and he's allowed that to build into this ever greater performing driver. But the skill sets and the ambition and the determination, that was all there and very evident back then. Yeah. I mean, we all saw in his first race or his first few races how skillful he was behind the wheel, how he wasn't afraid to go up against the current world champion as his teammate and push him hard. And by the end of that first season, he thought in his mind he was better than the current world champion in Alonso. Yeah. And there's an argument to say that on certain days he definitely was in his first year. So that's incredible just to think about that for a moment, because how often have we seen that since? Maybe never. But what he's done is he's constantly built and improved himself year on year. And even when you think he has the perfect year, if you ask Lewis, it's far from perfect, and there's always ways to improve. And that's, I think, what's most impressive about Lewis is that even at this point, 6 world championships, soon to be 7 world championships in, he's still looking for the smallest little improvements in himself, as well as pushing the team to look for improvements in the car.
I mean, Lewis has definitely got it. We saw in Monza coming from the back of the grid to 7th and the fastest lap. So you mentioned there Fernando Alonso. And again, I wanted to, so a lot of people think that 2007 Alonso, the first stint at McLaren, wasn't very good. Of course, he were involved with the Spygate scandal and things like that. And the second time of Alonso back in the Honda days was better. What was it like for you to work in that season alongside Fernando? I mean, did you like him as a driver? You know, again, what was it like maybe comparing him to Lewis Hamilton? And what was the vibe in the team? What was the kind of conclusive story of him in 2007?
Well, I mean, you've got to say 2007 for us was a disaster. Whichever way you look at it, it was a disaster. And it shouldn't have been, because we had the two fastest drivers in Formula One, and we probably had the best car in Formula One. Yeah. We had a great team, so we had all the ingredients to walk away with both championships. Now, that's an absolute rarity. That does not happen very often in this sport. Yeah. So you've got to say we messed all of that up, is the truth of it. When it comes to Fernando, I think there's a number of ways to look at it. I think he came in as the world champion. He's the top dog. He expected that Lewis, this rookie, wouldn't give him any trouble. And of course, he did give him trouble very early. He matched him for pace and even was quicker at some races. And that destabilized Fernando quicker than I thought most people expected it would. Quicker than Fernando thought it would. And drivers are kind of strange individuals in that they're so competitive. And I think you could say a little bit about this. Sort of happened to Bottas in a slight way the other day. He messed up his start. He got so flustered. You heard him talking about having a puncture. You saw him lose loads of positions, run wide on another corner, because he was so out of sorts and so flustered. He wasn't on his A game, because he was trying to overdrive it, trying to claw back that time. And in doing so, he kept messing things up. And I think Fernando, in a little bit of a similar way, was flustered by the fact that suddenly this young kid, who certainly all the British media were talking about, because he was a Brit, was actually, as good or quicker than him on some days. And he wasn't ready for that. So that certainly destabilized him. And his reaction to that was to try and wrestle power back within the team. And he did that in a number of ways on the racetrack. You remember the Hungary pit stop where he sat in the pit box. A bizarre set of occurrences. But also within the team, he tried to sort of wrestle the neutral members of the team, if you like, the ones not associated with either car, towards him. And I mean, he did that. There's a story in my book where Fernando went round at one particular race handing out little brown envelopes of cash to certain members of the team as a little bonus. So basically everybody apart from Lewis's team. And that was a weird thing, because that never happened before. Yeah. And, you could say that might have been a lovely gesture to say thank you to the team, or you could say he's trying to wrestle people towards his side, to wrestle an advantage for his side of the garage. And that's what I would say about Fernando. He's a brilliant driver. I have maximum respect for him when he's in a racing car, and I'm really looking forward to seeing him come back next year. Yeah. Outside of the racing car, when things are going well, he's as good as it gets. When things are not going well, a little bit perhaps like Sebastian Vettel, we've seen all sorts of trouble happening away from the racetrack in terms of his mental state and his personality and his relationships. So things can quickly go wrong for Fernando if he's not in a good place on the racetrack.
And does that affect drivers like we've seen? So you mentioned Sebastian Vettel there. Even when Seb was at Red Bull, he'd won 4 World Championships, and then the next year, Daniel Ricciardo comes in. And again, is that the Fernando Lewis type thing where Sebastian thinks he can walk Daniel, and of course Daniel takes 3 wins over Sebastian's none? And is that pretty similar to that? And of course, now we're seeing with Charles Leclerc even last year, because Leclerc is better than Vettel.
Yeah, I think it is. And Sebastian has reacted differently to the way Fernando did. It feels a little bit like Sebastian's head's gone down, doesn't it? I mean, we don't know the full story, but that it feels that way. And you got to remember that although these are elite sportsmen, they are, people hold them up as superheroes. They're still human beings that have good days and bad days, and are affected. Their performance, whether it's in the car or whether you're going to work in an office every day, your performance or your outward, appearance, your outward look, your outward performance on whatever your job is affected by all the factors that might be going on at home that people never see. I remember Lewis being in our team in the early days, and his performance was massively affected by his relationship, which was very up and down, with Nicole Scherzinger. Yeah. And if they were having an off couple of weeks, you can clearly see it on a graph. Lewis's performance dips away as the relationship does. And we used to joke there was more time in the car in keeping those two together than there was in anything we could do from an engineering sense. So drivers are human beings, and they're affected in a both positive way and a negative way by everything going on around them. So yes, I would say that that's a little bit like what we see with Sebastian.
Yeah. So just kind of last thing on your mechanic work with McLaren, on a typical race weekend, you rock up, because again with people thinking about the pit crew, the thing that they're, Sundays are made with a few seconds. Of course, your pit stops are longer, you had the refuel and things like that, but just talk us through a standard weekend for you with the team.
Well, it's busy, and certainly when I first started, we had no such thing as the curfew that they have now, the paddock curfew. So actually, we used to work. It was quite relatively common to work well into the early hours of the morning, if not all night on some occasions at the early part of the season when the car was new. That was kind of standard. So it's amazing when you think back. Health and safety wasn't really a thing then, so we used to be able to just keep going and do whatever we needed. Today, I guess it's still very busy, and I guess the biggest thing is that it's intense. So from the moment you arrive, there's no easy days. You are pretty much flat out busy, and that's with a standard weekend for most days. Sunday, of course, Sunday morning, a bit more quiet, unless you've had a problem on Saturday, building up to the race. But once you get to the race, the adrenaline is so high, you're so tense whilst you're in that garage, waiting for your pit stops, watching what's going on, that when you get to the end of a race weekend, Friday, by the way, is an incredibly long, busy day because you're running, the cars are running for 3 hours. And with that comes an awful lot of work. So on a Friday night, you're stripping the car completely. You're changing a lot of parts. You're servicing a lot of parts. You basically get out of that garage just before the curfew, and nothing much before that. So that's a really long day. So that's the first day of your running weekend, if you like. So Saturday, you're already knackered. And then you come into Saturday, which is massively important, of course. Another hour-long run, which creates a load more work between free practice and qualifying. And then qualifying, again, massively intense. The pressure in those moments is insane because the slightest mistake can cost you so dearly. And not only do you know it can cost you as a team, but millions of people watching at home know that it can cost you. I used to remember thinking millions of McLaren fans are kind of relying on me and my colleagues here to deliver this perfect pit stop or deliver a great car, whatever it might be. And you feel the weight of that pressure sometimes. So it's an intense weekend. And by the time you get to Sunday night and you get into pack up or whatever, the adrenaline kind of falls away and you are absolutely exhausted. And that's one race weekend. So now we're doing triple headers, and we're doing more than one set of triple headers. So this is a really tough season for everybody involved in the sport. I hope it doesn't set a precedent for the way things move forward, because people just won't be able to cope with this level. They're talking about moving to more races in the future, maybe 25 races as a target. You can do that, but you've got to have a slightly different way of working, maybe 2-day weekends or maybe rotating team members or whatever it is. But it's so high pressurized, so intense, so hard work, so long hours that you can't sustain that week in, week out.
Yeah, I guess when a lot of fans want more races, they don't really think about, the people that would work on the car. So obviously you just said about the weekend there, but that was really without the car, having any problems. 2019 Mexican Grand Prix, Valtteri Bottas spins it in Q3, and his team are working, through, and obviously the curfews and stuff, but they're working through the night, and they just get the car out on the morning. And also similarly, Max Verstappen in the Hungarian Grand Prix just a few races ago, of course, he slides off aquaplanes on the formation lap on the grid. And then the team, basically, they said they turned a 90-minute job into about 20 minutes. So when something like that goes on, what's the atmosphere like? Say if somebody bins it on qualifying or even early morning. Of course, Max's was very, very rare. But say in Valtteri's case, someone bins it on Saturday in FP3 or even qualifying. What's it like, the preparation to get it done for Sunday?
Well, when you're watching it on the monitors in the garage and you see your car buried into a barrier somewhere or whatever, immediately your heart sinks, because that's immediately a lot of work is the first reaction after your driver's okay, of course. But actually those moments, particularly the Max Verstappen one on the grid, those moments are what people like me live for, because the adrenaline rush when you achieve it, and I've been in situations like that, the adrenaline rush when you achieve it, and and the Max Verstappen's crew, of course, he went on to have a great result, didn't he? I think he came second in that race. Max Verstappen's crew know they've made a very visible, direct contribution to that race result. We do every week because you're putting the car together every single week in the best way possible. You're doing it behind the scenes. So they were stars of the show that particular day. And, the little bit of you that thrives on that adrenaline rush kind of loves those moments. So the crews are very well honed as a team. They know exactly what each of those people on that car crew know exactly what the other one's strengths and weaknesses are, what their roles are. And there's this mechanism that kicks in a situation like that. There's a hierarchy, of course, with a number one mechanic, a front end mechanic, and then others that are there to sort of assist. And they all just burst into action. And, it's beautiful to watch. It was great to see it on the grid that particular day. I kind of felt for them. But when they did it, I felt the kind of relief and the sense of pride that they would have had once they'd done it. And then Max went on to repay them in the best way he could by delivering second place. So they're tough moments, but they're also brilliant when they work out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that moment was incredible. And I told many people, I said, Max owes them everything. And if he did win the race, which he's tantalising close to, then that would have been, I mean, you hear it on the radio, of course, the elation, I love you boys and stuff from Sebastian and the, great job guys after every race. But that was one of the best moments I saw from kind of the pit crew getting involved. So last thing on this, the best memories, the best kind of things you learned from your time at McLaren. So if you had to pick one memory, one of the best kind of things that you heard, the best lessons you've learned, the best person you work with, what would be the best thing you would take from your career at McLaren?
Well, I don't think I need to think. There's a few things. I mean, obviously, what I just said about Lewis, I think he's inspirational character. This idea of always looking to improve yourself. I try and take some of that, from him and be inspired by him. But I think the single biggest influence on my life, both at McLaren and since I've left, was Ron Dennis. Because Ron was running the company, of course, back then, and Ron undoubtedly has OCD. I don't have OCD, but I've definitely taken a lot of his attention to detail into my life today, and I think I 100% believe it's helped me to succeed in the path that I'm on now and in things I do on a daily basis, because I try to leave no stone unturned in terms of if I'm preparing for something. And that all comes from McLaren. It's about attention to detail in everything you do. I try and pass it on to my own kids. It drives them mad now. But Ron was an inspirational character. He was a pain in the arse to work for, if I'm really honest, because to work for someone who has OCD, if you don't have it, it's quite difficult because he expects perfection at all times. And no one can deliver perfection at all times, but we were always striving for it. And that's, I think, what helps you to constantly look for improvements, even if they're the tiniest improvements. You never stop looking for them. And I think hopefully that's the biggest lesson, I guess, that I've learned from working for 10 years for Ron and in that amazing factory at MTC, which is just inspirational in itself. To come away from there, I hope that some of that attention to detail has stuck with me.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely incredible. I mean, I was going to ask about Ron Dennis for sure. Definitely a great character. It's good that you got on so well with him. So obviously moving away from your career at McLaren, you've left Formula One, but you've still been in the motorsport scene. At the moment, you've been on TV programs, Driving Wild and Wheel of Dealers, which is both on Amazon actually. You've been a motivational speaker, and you've also written 2 books called The Mechanic, which you've just mentioned there before. They're also available on Amazon. So you've done a lot from your career at McLaren. What made you want to pursue a further career outside of, so you've had 10 amazing seasons at McLaren. What made you want to pursue a career on TV and become an author and basically still be an ambassador and still be an entertainer and still be someone involved in motorsport and Formula One?
Well, the truth is I never set out to do that. That was never a goal. And actually when I left McLaren, so I left McLaren in 2009, like you say, after almost 10 years. And the main reason I left actually was mostly because we just won the championship with Lewis. So that was, if you're ever looking for a kind of a way out, if you like, that was probably it. And the reason I kind of thought about a way out was because the travel was becoming so intense, so extended over the seasons were getting longer and longer. The gaps in between seasons were getting shorter. I had a young family, which I wasn't seeing very much. So those are the main drivers for actually leaving. But when I left, I had no real idea what I wanted to do. It's just that I knew I couldn't carry on giving the same level of commitment I'd been giving up until that point. And I'd achieved the single greatest thing that we could achieve in Formula One. So it felt like that was just the moment. And I don't know why it came at that moment, but I had this moment where I thought, you know, it was a big decision, but this is the time to move on and do something else. And actually, when I first left, I was in a bit of no man's land because I worked in the factory for the first year after I left. Yeah. And I watched the guys go off to the first race in Australia and just desperately wanted to be with them. Yeah. All my mates, of course. So I missed it massively. And so I started writing, actually, was the first thing I did, about my experiences, because I realized I had this very different perspective on Formula One to that of most fans. A lot of what I knew was very secretive within the world of Formula One, but didn't need to be. Just behind the scenes stuff, nothing that was going to give away secrets from the team. Yeah. But just people were interested in what happens behind the cameras, you know, what happens behind the scenes. And I started writing about some of that. And actually from the writing, it was the producers of the Radio 5, the BBC Radio 5 F1 broadcast that picked up on my writing and got in touch one day and said, listen, we like what you're writing about. We think it might work on the radio. Do you want to come along and have a go at being a pit lane reporter? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to give that a go. So I went straight to Silverstone. I jumped in the pit lane alongside Jenny Gow at the time. She kind of showed me the ropes. I shadowed her all weekend. And I came away from that weekend having absolutely loved it. The first thing they ever got me to do, they said, here's a microphone and a recorder. So nothing live on there, but said, go into the paddock and just talk to people. Get as many interviews as you can. See some interesting people. First person I bumped into was Bernie Ecclestone. And I thought, right, this is what I've got to ask him. I've got to ask him a question. But he's terrifying. Bernie was the ringmaster, of course, for all of my time in the sport. He's about half my height, but he's just the most terrifying character that I've ever had to sort of look down on to interview. And I sort of stumbled through this interview that was probably terrible. I was so nervous. But he was amazing and really kind, really helpful. He got called away halfway through and I thought, oh, that's it. He actually came back 10 minutes later, found me again and said, I'm really sorry that I got called away. It's not fair on you. Is there anything else you'd like to ask me? So I got this kind of nice, although it wasn't very slick from my end, it was a really nice personal interview with Bernie. So that was an amazing start. And I loved the whole experience. And from that weekend onwards, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get into broadcasting. Yeah. And so I kind of set about in the same way I'd done at McLaren all those years ago in trying to get into Formula One. I tried to actively pursue a career in broadcasting and started, again, writing to people, getting in touch with anybody that I knew and using my experience to try and get roles everywhere. So I did a lot of stuff for Sky. I did some more stuff for the BBC and it's led on to, well, some amazing experiences, you know, like you've mentioned there. So I'm very lucky, but enjoyed every second of it.
Yeah, very lucky also. So as well as, of course, your books that you've written and, you know, talking about your experience at McLaren, you're also on YouTube as well. And again, you're doing very well in terms of that. I think one of the best things about your channel is your in-depth knowledge. You know, you don't just talk about Formula One, you go into detail and explain, you know, why things happen. And of course, also tell your stories from McLaren. So you're in the media bubble again, but would you like to get back into Formula One and this time possibly become more of like work with the FIA or work with McLaren again in more of a higher up role? What would be your aspiration, or would you just be happy to be with the media and of course expand your ways with Sky and things like that in the future?
A lot of people ask me if I'd ever like to go back to a team, and I mean, I would never say never. I certainly wouldn't rule anything out, but I don't really have a desire. I feel like I've done that. And actually, I'm enjoying what I do now so much that it still feels new to me. And I'm still doing new things in terms of the media. So I kind of feel like at the moment, I've got no plan to do anything other than continue on the trajectory that I'm going. I'm really enjoying doing my YouTube channel, because with that, you get almost total freedom to talk about and do whatever you want. Whereas with all the other TV stuff you have a producer saying, right, stand there, you know, wear this, say this. With my own channel on YouTube, you can talk about whatever you want. So like I said before, with the writing, I feel like I've got a kind of a very different perspective to most people from having the background that I have, understanding what goes into in the garage, what happens in a pit stop, what happens inside a team, from an engineering perspective as well. And seemingly a lot of people are interested in that. So I'm really enjoying sharing some of that knowledge with people in my little way through YouTube. So no plans at the moment. I'm just enjoying life, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. You know, your knowledge of Formula One, of course, are incredible. Your stories also. But let's say tomorrow or next season, Andreas Seidel rings you up and says, "We've got a spot on the pit wall for you." What would you say to that? I mean, also McLaren chances next year, 2021 Mercedes engine, Daniel Ricciardo on board. What would you say if Andreas rang you right now? What would you say to that?
Well, I'd be absolutely humbled, first of all. I mean, I will always be a lifelong McLaren fan. You know, in some of the roles I do now, you have to be impartial with some of this stuff. You know, when you're commentating on a race, for example, you've got to be impartial. But deep down, there's no hiding it. I will always be a McLaren fan. So, you know, I would, you know, I'd answer the call. Let's put it that way. I don't know is the answer, because first of all, I don't think it'll happen. But secondly, if I thought I could bring something that would genuinely help that team to succeed, then of course I'd have to consider it, because ultimately I'd love to see them back on top. And if I could be part of that again, it'd be an amazing experience. But the reality is that they've got some brilliant people there now, you know, way cleverer than I am. And I think they've got all the building blocks in place now, with Daniel Ricciardo coming, with Lando staying, with a Mercedes engine coming, with a lot of the infrastructure they've been building over the last few years behind the scenes as well. New wind tunnel on the way, new simulator on the way. They've invested a huge amount to be successful in the future. And I have no doubt that will translate into success. So yes, to answer the question, yes, I would, if I thought I could help them, and if they thought I could help them, I'd definitely have that conversation. But actually, I don't think they need me. I think they're on the right trajectory, and I can't wait till they can all pull on those winning celebratory T-shirts at the end of a Grand Prix again.
I do hope so also. And you mentioned there Daniel Ricciardo, of course. McLaren are a team that are in an amazing trajectory, and I have really big faith in them for next year. So 2021, go back to Mercedes engines. Daniel Ricciardo comes into the team alongside Lando, who is, you know, of course, incredible driver. Those two, you know, great setup, I'd say, Andreas and Zach, and the Mercedes engine. What are you predicting for McLaren next year?
It's quite a difficult one to predict. I'm predicting a lot of fun between those two. They're going to be great fun together, aren't they? I think they're going to be really strong as a driver pairing. I think it'll be brilliant. The interesting part and the unknown part is the Mercedes engine coming. We know what a Mercedes power unit can do. It's a great solid engine. It's the class leader. So that's got to be a positive. But because of the situation this year with Formula One having put these various technical restrictions in place, McLaren have to keep the same chassis next year. So they'll be installing a Mercedes power unit into a chassis and a package that was designed to accommodate a Renault. That might not sound like a massive problem, but actually the packaging of those two power units have some differences. And therefore there will be some compromise in terms of the aerodynamics, so the shape of the car, which might not have been optimized for the Mercedes power unit. They've got to use up all of their available development tokens on actually fitting that power unit to the car, whereas others will be able to use their development tokens to essentially improve the car and go quicker. So they'll have that for next year, which is a bit of an unknown. They might get lucky, and it may be that the Mercedes just works perfectly with what they've got, and they can adapt it quite seamlessly, and they could be onto a winner. Or they might find that they have a little bit of a penalty because of that. But we don't know how big, if that'll be there, or how big it might be. So slight unknown. But I think that, you know, what McLaren are doing, they're not just looking to 2021, they're looking way beyond that. And of course, 2022, the big opportunity for everybody, everything's building towards that. Not just for McLaren, for everybody, of course, but McLaren are putting themselves in a really solid position when it comes to the big opportunity for 2022. Yeah,
definitely. McLaren are definitely looking for it. I feel like it's like peaks and troughs, and McLaren Honda was definitely the bottom, and they are on the rise for sure. Again, Marc, thank you very much. It's been a great interview so far. I've just got one last thing I want to ask you. We ask everyone this. It's your F1 dream team. So from that, I'd like you to give us 2 drivers. So your number 1 and number 2 driver, team principal, a car, a team sponsor, and your team name. So let's start with your 2 drivers, please.
Oh, goodness me. Okay, well, the 2 drivers, it's got to be Lewis. I think I would go for Lewis and Daniel Ricciardo.
Okay,
I think they'd be a
that's a good
really
choice.
great pairing. I don't think Daniel is phased by going up against a big character. He's done it in the past. I don't think Lewis would be phased by Daniel coming in. So that would be a solid lineup. How well they'd get on, I think they'd probably get on generally.
Yeah.
So that would be the lineup. I mean, the car, I mean, you can't look beyond the Mercedes, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just in a class of its own, and
it can be over, you know, since Formula One began as well. Like we can look at, you know, back at like Senna's car and things like that.
Well, I mean, I still think the current Mercedes. I would say that it's just the fastest car. It's not just the fastest car we've ever had in Formula One, but it's also seemingly the most versatile. It's the one that's been incrementally improving since this hybrid era came in, and that's what Mercedes has been so strong as, is looking at the weaknesses of last year's car, addressing them, and sort of ironing them out. And you know, we've seen these party modes disappear, of course, at the weekend.
Yeah,
made no difference, because on a straight level playing field, they're nearly a second quicker than their closest rivals. You know, somewhere between 7/10 and a second quicker when they go for it. That's an unheard of kind of advantage when everyone's playing to the same rules. And so I think that car is as close to perfection as we've ever had in a Formula One car. I mean, I love the active cars, of course, the Williams active cars. I mean, that kind of technology was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love it if we could go back to that one day. So maybe that would be the thing from the past that I'd love to bring back. But yeah, the W11 is a pretty special car.
Yeah. So let's go your team principal.
I mean, I loved working for Ron. I don't think he would necessarily be right for the modern era. I think things have moved on from where Ron was. I think Toto is doing a pretty decent job, isn't he, in terms of the role of team principal for the modern era. But actually, you know, I always loved Eddie Jordan's ethos.
Yeah.
Just because he was about having fun. He was an underdog scrapping his way through Formula One.
Yeah.
Again, it wouldn't really work in the modern era, but if we're building a fantasy Formula One team, I'd say Eddie Jordan would be a brilliant bloke to work for. You'd have a lot of fun and the occasional bit of success. So yeah, he'd be great.
And then let's go your team sponsor and your team name.
Team sponsor. Well, when I was a mechanic, it was during the tobacco era, and I'm ashamed to say that almost everybody smoked in the pit lane back then because there were free cigarettes everywhere. So I'd go for something that we could all benefit from having free. So that would probably be some kind of beer or something. I'd have a beer sponsor. How about that?
Yeah. But Formula One's promoting don't drink and drive, and then you go with your beer company. But best way, definitely. In your team name, Mark.
Goodness me. I've got no idea on that one. That has put me on the spot.
Elvis F1.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably, that's a bit, I mean, it feels a bit Brawn F1, doesn't it? I always thought that was a little bit it feels a bit self-centered to name the team after myself.
Well,
but
I mean, Ross Brawn probably didn't know what he was, you know, what they would have achieved. No. Maybe if their 2009 season went south, maybe Ross Brawn would be thinking maybe it wasn't the right thing. But again, like Eddie Jordan also, you know, he took a gamble and named after him. So
he did. That's true. Yeah, maybe I'd have a little nod to Elvis and call it something like Blue Suede F1 or something like that.
That's a great name. Awesome. Right, well, that's the end of the interview. Mark, thank you so much for your time. We really, really do appreciate it. You've had some amazing stories about McLaren also. Of course, you have your 2 books out. They're available on Amazon as well. So go and check them out, guys. And also Mark's YouTube channel will be leaving links down below. Also, amazing guy. He goes into so much detail about what happens in a Formula weekend and basically how Formula One is operating these days. I say really appreciate your interview and your time today, Mark. Thank you very much. And guys, thank you very much for watching. We do hope you've enjoyed this interview with Marc Priestley. If you are new to our channel, please like and subscribe. We have so much more content coming for you over the 2020 season. Hit subscribe and notification bell. You'll be told every time we upload our videos. So thank you very much for watching this one. Stay safe, and until next time, guys, we'll see you later.